Here's your emergency. Get in with a knife.
They see a young gentleman. This brutal murder had occurred. It was a shock to the system. The big guy, that's the guy we're looking for.
Someone's tearing up a room and there's people in there.
It's the police!
We now have an 82-year-old female who also seems to have suffered from stab wounds to her back.
I don't know what kind of animal could do that.
Mom, I'm so sorry to what happened to you.
Now we've got two separate victims. They come from two different worlds. Is that even possible for one individual to do both of those in the same night?
We did it. Yeah.
82-year-old Bonnie Ross lives alone, but stays in close contact with her family.
Hey, Tony. Sorry I missed you.
My mom, Bonnie, was caring, wonderful person, and just loved life and people and family.
She was the best. She was really good to us, you know, me and my other brothers. And she always took care of us, you know what I mean? I don't know, she just was a good person, you know, always has been.
Bonnie has called this area home for most of her life.
My mom was pretty popular in Pasco. Yeah, just pretty much everywhere we go, somebody would run into her that she knew, and, oh, Bonnie, Bonnie, and she just loved talking to people and being engaged.
And Bonnie loves to give back to the community.
Grandma Bonnie's standing in life was to help and please everybody. She would go to nursing homes and cut hair for the ladies there and the gentlemen, you know, older people who couldn't get out. If you knew Bonnie, she loved you and you loved her.
Your emergency. My friend is dead. Hello? Hello? What's going on? Get in with a knife. Somebody is killing somebody with a knife. Yeah.
Units are dispatched to the scene. The caller stays on the line.
All right, what's your name? Chicago. Okay, so where's the guy that's killing somebody? He's running away.
Pasco isn't a super violent city. Homicides and things like that aren't a daily occurrence, aren't a weekly occurrence. As our officers come up, they were able to locate the caller.
Follow me. Here in Galway.
They see an African-American male that's laying on his back. He's got a wound of some kind to his stomach because there's a fair amount of blood on his chest. It's apparent to them that he's already deceased.
Police recognize him as 39-year-old Demetrius Graves.
Demetrius had a long criminal history with us. He's known to police.
We need to lock this down.
So a lot of things start going through your head. Where is the suspect? What could have happened that caused this violent act to occur? The caller was Shigao Gagao. He lives on the streets. He's a transient in our Pasco area. Shigao appeared to be so fired up and so animated that we couldn't understand much of what he was saying at all.
There's one guy, I know him. Put your hands on your back. I'm gonna detain you for right now, okay? Okay.
You're just detained right now, okay? Until we figure out what's going on.
Shigao was detained at that time just because they're trying to make sure that scene is safe.
Stand up real quick. Stand up. Take the phone. No. Leave it there. Okay, leave it there. Hey, do you have anything on you that I need? Do you have any other weapons? No. I just got to do a quick pat down.
They had to make sure he wasn't a part of it, that he wasn't the suspect that we were looking for. Because that happens.
All right, here, come sit in the back of my patrol car.
Officers document and collect evidence.
We find a box knife, which was something that could have been used to cause the damage to our victim.
Scattered paperwork is also recovered.
Is that knife that's on the ground over there, is that the weapon?
No. That one I got from his car.
You got that from your car?
Yeah, his car.
He says that the box knife wasn't the murder weapon, that it was just something that he had on him.
We knew that the victim was stabbed with an object. We knew that Shigao had a knife in his possession. So he was transported over to the police station to continue that interview.
We didn't know his involvement, if he had seen something, if he was the one that had stabbed him.
Take your time and tell us what happened.
He kind of lays out what happened that night, how he's friends with Demetrius Graves.
Shigao says he met with victim Demetrius Graves and a third man.
A male individual, which he referred to as the big guy, taller Hispanic male, heavier set.
Shigao claims they went to the Metromart gas station around 2 a.m., where they met a fourth man, known only as Ariel.
The individual leads them to the residence where they were going to go smoke. The big guy, out of nowhere, became aggressive to the point where he started assaulting them.
According to Shigao, the big guy chases down Graves, stabs him, and flees the scene.
I had no idea what big guy's name is.
The big guy didn't know his name, didn't even know his street name, just that he was a big guy. So at this point in the investigation, we didn't have a lot of leads. What we had is from Shigao's interview that they were all together at the Metromart. It's difficult to tell if he is telling the truth or not.
Police request security footage from Metromart for the previous night. Later, that same Valentine's Day, Bonnie tries to call her son, Tony.
This was on Valentine's Day, and my mom left a message. There was no question at all that she loved me very much. She would always say things positive to people. That's just the way she was.
Metromart has released the footage for police to view.
Knowing that all the four individuals were all at the Metromart, we did believe that it was crucial.
This is all we've got. If this doesn't pan out, we're at ground zero.
Played from just before 2 a.m.
Shigao told us that there were 4 individuals involved. There was Shigao himself, our victim, Demetrius Graves, a guy known as Ariel, and the big guy. We wanted to identify those 4 people.
Do we have anything covering the door?
Stop there. There she go.
Keep playing. Yes.
That's Graves.
So we see our victim walking in. Our victim, Demetrius Graves, was wearing a bright yellow jacket. That yellow jacket's what really stood out to us. So we could see Demetrius Graves. He's kind of doing a little dance thing there as he comes into the Metro Mart. So we had Shigao identified. We had Demetrius Graves identified. They weren't in the store for very long, and they go out front. They milled about a little bit.
Zoom in on the doors.
We're able to see out the front doors.
We start to look for the remaining individuals involved.
Keep playing. Someone's talking with Graves. Freeze. Who's this guy in the camo pants?
Could be Ariel.
Police believe this is Ariel, the man Shigao described meeting at Metromart.
Shigao said they arrived with Big Guy, so where is he?
First, Demetrius Graves, then Shigao comes in, and then somebody taller.
This is our big guy.
We did kind of fit that moniker of a big guy. Shigao himself is fairly tall, but the suspect was even a little taller than Shigao.
Detectives observe the group's interactions.
Keep playing.
They're kind of loitering around. They end up talking to two other individuals that are customers at the Metro Mart.
We were trying to see if we could find motive, why this had occurred. If we could see them having an issue, having a disturbance. We didn't see anything like that. And then they left.
Stop. Zoom in.
And you could see the headlights of the vehicle as they drove away in the same direction that Shigao told us that they drove. Now that we've got this Metromart footage, we now have all four parties that were at the location when the homicide occurred. Shigao, Demetrius Graves, Ariel, and the big guy. So now we've got to get to tracking down these two individuals that are still outstanding.
Police send screen grabs to local law enforcement. According to Shigao's statement, after Metromart, they went to a nearby alleyway. Ariel rode a bike, and the others followed by car.
We started to dig around the area and look for additional cameras. And we find cameras on some of the houses along the alleyway where we know this murder happened.
Investigators collect footage to review.
Those cameras could have potentially captured everything on camera. So for us, that would be gold. That would be investigative gold.
They queue up footage from a house located to the south of the alley.
They leave Metromart around 2 a.m., so cue from then. Stop. Go back. Play from here.
The footage seems to match Shigao's statement that he, Graves, and the big guy follow Ariel on a bike.
We felt that if we had what had happened on video up to the point of the actual stabbing.
Detectives keep watching for 30 minutes.
There's a potential that that crime that occurred is on video. But the video footage just isn't good enough to us to see exactly what's occurring.
Keep playing. Who's that?
We were able to see silhouettes of individuals running in the alley at the time of the homicide, but identifying the suspects from that video is beyond difficult.
Have you gotten any other cameras?
Detectives switch to a camera further along the alley.
Show that again.
We see an individual running westbound in the alley, fleeing. It appeared that you see an individual chasing them.
Slow-mo it.
One of the individuals that's running through the alleyway has fluorescent reflections on his shoes.
Shigao has reflective sneakers on when he's picked up by police.
So now we can identify him as one of those individuals.
They can't ID the second man and are no closer to finding the big guy.
That's a frustrating thing for us because the video footage just isn't good enough for identification purposes.
Investigators go through all the evidence collected at the crime scene.
We got something.
We located some paperwork in the alley just east of the location of Graves.
As we started to analyze that paperwork, we looked inside and found jail paperwork.
The paperwork did not have Demetrius's name on it, but had another individual's name, Hector Orozco Jr.
So we took the booking photo and compared it with the video footage that we acquired from the Metromart.
Looks like him.
So we were able to identify Orozco as the big guy. He is a dangerous individual. He's somebody that has committed violence before. We need to get this guy in custody.
Police discover that Hector Orozco is staying at a motel in Pasco. Undercover officers set up surveillance.
Halfway through the day, a little blue car pulls in to the parking lot, and a male gets out and then goes into one of the rooms there.
911, where's your emergency?
A roadside inn in Pasco.
Is that the roadway in? What's going on there?
Someone's tearing up a room and there's people in there. I hear a lot of banging and stuff and...
The disturbance is coming from the room that's under surveillance.
A different male comes out who is not Orozco, and he's bleeding from his face, and he says he was being attacked inside by Orozco.
Please, call it out with your hands up! Keep your hands up! Come on, let's go!
And we took Orozco back to the police department to do a formal interview. We were excited to get his side of the story, but also to see if we could get him talking and see if we could get him to confess to this crime.
What's your full name, sir?
Hector Jr.
Orozco claims that the incident at the motel was self-defense. Detectives move on to the fatal stabbing of Demetrius Graves.
The people that we talked to, they threw out several names. One of those is your name.
Is he okay?
Huh?
Is he okay?
No, that man passed away.
So he passed?
Yeah.
That's what dog. He went down. How did he die?
He was stabbed.
Can you did it?
No.
Can you let me know?
Hmm?
Can you let me know?
Well, your name was brought up, so that's why we're trying to...
Okay, well, obviously something.
Okay.
He acted surprised. He wanted to know who the killer was, right? Which was odd.
But I did not, whatever, hurt somebody.
Okay. And how do we prove that?
I don't know, he was probably left me, because he was driving the car that my mom lent, and he picked me up in it, and we're driving around. We stopped at this one house, and he took off without me, and I haven't seen him since.
He did admit that he was with Graves and Chagall, but as far as the homicide, he denied any involvement in them. He denied being in the alley.
We have video surveillance that shows that you were with them. Do you remember where store you showed up at? After that time, so we have the time that you guys were there.
Okay.
Shortly thereafter that time, we look at the video surveillance from the residence, and it shows you guys showing up. So it shows that you're not being truthful. Can you understand what I'm telling you as part of the evidence that's against you?
Okay, that's great, sir. That's good.
So we had to try to get him to admit that he was there, that he knew what was going on.
Right now, the thing is, how are you going to paint yourself? Was this premeditated murder, or was it an accident? Was it something?
I truly want to talk to you, but it keeps stinging me right now when you keep saying it was a premeditated murder. I know you're doing your job.
I don't think.
I don't want to lawyer up because that seems like a because you want to talk it out. But please stop saying that.
Okay. I'm sorry. But the thing is, that's the evidence that we have.
I know.
Okay.
Hector still denied and, really didn't give a statement.
Why did you hurt Demetra?
Thank you. I gave you the opportunity, you don't want to take it.
He was booked into the local jail for the assault at the motel.
We didn't have enough at the time to book him on the homicide. All we had was Chagall's story. When we arrested Orozco, we also took his vehicle. It was a blue Toyota, older model. The thing that really stuck out to me about this car is there was a bumper sticker on it that said, "My boss is a Jewish carpenter." It's weird to see a guy like Orozco with his criminal history driving a car with that bumper sticker on it. So that was a red flag for me. So we ran the plates on that vehicle. And it returned to an 82-year-old lady named Bonnie Ross. So we wanted to check up on the registered owner and see how Orozco had come into possession of this vehicle. They leave a note for her to call them with a case number.
Where's your emergency?
We got a 911 call from the a couple people that were neighbors with an older lady, and they said that they went inside and found her deceased in the hallway of the home.
They actually discovered what appeared to be knife wounds to this person. But what was unique is that the person named in this house is Bonnie Ross, the person who owns a vehicle that was driven by Hector Orozco.
So as detectives come on scene, we start to look for forensic evidence. She was laying on her stomach. She had a tissue clutched in her hand, and there was a fair amount of blood on her face. And she had a stab wound to her upper back.
It looked like this was a very violent assault. There was a sign of trauma to her neck as well, that she might have been strangled.
There was a ligature recovered. There's a potential for DNA evidence to be left behind, so we send it off to the lab to be forensically examined. The kitchen was kind of a mess and looked like it had been rummaged through. Her purse had been dumped out onto the counter, so it looked like it had potentially been a robbery. We found a notepad with a grocery list on it. She appeared like she was shopping, getting her groceries on that same day. We started to look around her home for signs of forced entry, but the door hadn't been kicked in. There was no forced entry into the house.
This suggests she knew her attacker.
Yeah.
Going to the scene of a murdered 82-year-old female, there's not a lot of things that can prepare you for that, right? It was one of the saddest scenes that I've been to because she was so small and so helpless. As we were on scene, all of us were furious about this. So we wanted to do everything we could to make sure that we got justice for Bonnie.
Detectives make contact with Bonnie Ross's family.
Yes? Tony Ross?
Yes.
I'm sorry it's your mother.
It was a shock. I didn't know how to respond or react. I was just frozen. It was just devastating to us, and just not only the loss, the sadness, the why, the frustration and anger, and who would do this to such a kind, loving person.
Tony informs the rest of Bonnie's family.
I was at home, and he told me that Mom had been murdered, you know. I don't know why he had hurt her so bad, you know. I don't know what kind of animal could do that, or person could do that. It's just beyond me.
It was heartbreaking. It was heartbreaking for everyone involved. The hardest thing I had to do was when I had to tell my kids that their grandma was brutally murdered, and then they had to deal with it. I couldn't take that pain away for them, or my husband, or Tony. She lived and loved everybody. She just had a mother's heart.
Pasco police now have two victims, Demetrius Graves and Bonnie Ross, found within 3 days.
They come from two different worlds, completely different socioeconomic areas.
We're trying to figure out what is the connection between any of these two individuals. What's the connection with the suspects or a suspect?
We were trying to see if it was possible that these two cases could be linked. But it was super confusing because we couldn't quite put all the pieces together.
Detectives develop a lead on one of the potential suspects in the Graves case, the man known as Ariel.
Sharing a snapshot of the individual, the Hispanic male, we learned that possible name for him would be Ariel Contreras. We knew that we needed to locate Ariel.
Ariel had a warrant for his arrest. We were looking for him in every nook and cranny, trying to find him.
We ended up finding him several towns away at his mom's residence. So we were able to arrest him on the arrest warrant, at which point we brought him back to the police station.
Now we need to find out what happened to Graves. And we were trying to see how these two cases could be linked.
All we want to do is get your side of the story of what happened that night.
Okay. That night, I was on my bike. I went to Chevron. And that's where I bumped into Mo, that dude, and that other dude.
Mo is the street name of victim Demetrius Graves.
Ariel admitted that he was the guy on the bicycle, that he had led them around the corner there from the Metro Mart, that Chagall, Graves, and the big guy had all followed him in the car while he rode his bicycle over to the alleyway where Graves was ultimately murdered.
I heard a commotion outside, like yelling, like, oh, I got you, bro. I heard footsteps, a couple of footsteps. So I told him there's two guys running.
In the dark alley, Ariel hears the attack.
I don't know what the hell he was doing, but that's what I heard. Like, just like, like that kind of, you know, we were trying to get the blow or maybe blocking a blow.
We were able to marry up a lot of his stories and statements with video footage that we had recovered. It appeared that this guy's going to tell us the truth.
Detectives show Ariel a photo lineup and ask him to identify the other man in the alley.
From looking at the pictures, they're going to be numbered. This would be number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so take your time.
Right there. You sure?
Yep.
How certain? Explain that to me. How certain?
I remember it's him right there.
Which one?
This guy right there.
Go ahead, circle.
This dude.
So he was able to identify a Roscoe. And that helped to solidify that it was just a Roscoe that had murdered Graves and that Ariel and Chagall hadn't played any piece in that.
Weird faces that I will forget.
That's fine if that's what you want to write.
Detectives don't get anything from Ariel on Bonnie Ross's murder.
Part of the struggle with this case is that we really weren't getting that strong connection to Bonnie Ross, to Hector Orozco, or to any of the other individuals. We don't know who was responsible for her murder.
Police canvass Bonnie's neighborhood and speak with family and friends.
Was there anybody that harassing her, stalking her, anything that they knew that was out of the ordinary, right?
Detectives learn of a man who Bonnie recently had a disagreement with.
We heard about a guy that lived on her property in a trailer.
It seemed like this person might have run in kind of the rough crowd, so to speak.
Investigators discover that a few months before her murder, Bonnie had asked the man to leave her property.
It was somebody that she knew, and there was no forced entry into the house.
Either he might have some involvement in what happened with Bonnie, or one of his friends might have involvement.
Police look into whether this man can be connected to their other suspect, Hector Orozco.
We knew that Hector had been driving Bonnie's vehicle.
So one of our theories was that this guy had killed Bonnie and taken the car and given it to Orozco. So we were looking now intently for him to see what his play in all of this was. So we start hunting for him, looking everywhere. We end up finally finding him. And we bring him in for an interview and start talking to him.
So this was about Bonnie?
When we told him that she had been murdered, he was upset that she was murdered this way. And he wanted to know as bad as we did, right, who did this and why this had happened.
Can I check where you were on Valentine's Day?
He's able to give us a pretty good alibi at the time, and we were able to substantiate that alibi. Because we were able to corroborate his alibi and knew that he wasn't there, we believed his story.
Police check his statement and confirm he has no connection to Orozco or the murders.
We were in doubt for a lot of the investigation on if it was this guy and Orozco, if they had worked together. And now we were able to eliminate him as a suspect and focus solely on Orozco. So we now have Orozco as a suspect for both murders, but we're still missing a couple pieces to tie these two cases together.
Witness testimony and video evidence indicate Orozco leaves Demetrius Graves' murder scene on foot. Bonnie Ross is killed hours later across town. Police canvassed the most likely route.
We looked at businesses along the way to try to identify video surveillance and things that we could acquire that would help us to see if that was the path that the suspect had taken.
They locate a tire shop downtown with a number of cameras.
We were trying to see if an individual could get from the Graves homicide scene to Bonnie's house in the same night.
We know Orozco left Graves about 2 a.m., so let's play from then.
What's that?
Slow mo it? Push in. Looks like him, but no hoodie.
In the footage from earlier that night, Orozco wears a hoodie.
It is hovering around freezing, and he is stripped down to basically a t-shirt. So clearly there is something that has caused him to want to change either his clothing or appearance. Possibly that item had a lot of evidence on it, and he got rid of it.
Have you gotten any other cameras? Go back. Okay, zoom in. Yes, that's him.
In that video, you see Hector. It was extremely odd to see how relaxed he was, how calmly he was walking away from the location where Graves was killed.
What is key about this particular moment is that Hector Orozco turns and he heads generally down to the west, which would certainly be a direction that would lead to where Bonnie Ross resides.
We still needed to prove that Hector had been inside of Bonnie's house and had actually committed the homicide against Bonnie.
Phone records for Bonnie's landline come in.
So as we're going through the phone records, trying to identify each phone number that was called, we called one of the numbers.
Hello, can I ask who I'm speaking with, please?
And a female answered. It was a shock to the system, to say the least.
Okay, thank you very much, ma'am. Goodbye.
None of us expected that phone number to belong to Orozco's mother. Hector Orozco called his mom from Bonnie's phone on the day that she was murdered.
Those phone records basically showed that he made that phone call from the house of Bonnie Ross at a time only a few minutes after Bonnie had left that very touching Valentine's Day voice message with her son. So Hector Orozco was in the home within minutes of when Bonnie Ross was alive.
Oddly enough, Hector's mom confirmed that Hector had called her to wish her a happy Valentine's Day.
So it's odd, it's weird, it's eerie.
DNA results from the Bonnie Ross murder come in.
It showed that on the ligature there was DNA, and the DNA belonged to Hector Orozco. And that was a huge win for us. We were able to prove definitively that he was the one that killed Bonnie Ross.
Hector Orozco is charged with the second-degree murder of Demetrius Graves and the first-degree murder of Bonnie Ross. He is convicted and sentenced to 50 years in prison. For the motel attack, Orozco is convicted and sentenced to a further 7 years.
Both murders were brutal murders. As such, he needed to go to prison, and he's where he belongs. The video played a huge part, and especially in the court case, right? So we were able to show the jury a very good video sequence of events that helped them visualize what happened.
The night before Valentine's Day, the group, including Demetrius Graves and Hector Orozco, meet at the gas station. They travel to a nearby alleyway. Over a disagreement, Orozco pulls a knife.
Shigao describes Hector going crazy, upset at Demetrius Graves, eventually chasing him down the alley, committing a violent assault upon him with an edged weapon, and left him there to die.
Orozco walks across town. Later, Bonnie Ross is returning from the market, and Orozco spots an easy target.
That was a crime of opportunity for Hector, seeing Bonnie out front of her house, taking her inside, assaulting her, actually stabbing her in the back inside her home.
Orozco leaves, taking cash and Bonnie's car.
This case was tragic on many levels.
When I think about what he did to her, he's worse than a monster. And she didn't deserve that. It was a tremendous loss. I couldn't have asked for a better mother-in-law. She wasn't a mother-in-law, she was a mother.
The scorching Texas heat of August 2005 did not just bake the concrete of Dallas. It seemed to warp reality itself, creating a shimmering, deceptive haze over a city about to be plunged into a decades-long waking nightmare. It was a suffocating Friday night when the music stopped, the laughter curdled, and a 23-year-old marketing executive named Sabrina Vance vanished into the neon-lit abyss of the Deep Ellum Entertainment District. She was the picture of success, a brilliant young woman climbing the corporate ladder, fiercely independent, adored by her colleagues, and entirely disconnected from the violent underbelly of the Metroplex. Her friends last saw her walking toward a multi-story parking garage at exactly 1:14 a.m., her high heels clicking rhythmically against the asphalt, a half-empty bottle of sparkling water in her hand, her mind focused on the weekend ahead. But she never reached her vehicle, never made it home to her apartment, and never answered the frantic phone calls that began to flood her mobile device as the sun rose over a stunned community. The following morning, her pristine sedan was found parked perfectly in its designated spot, completely untouched, keys missing, her purse resting heavily on the passenger seat with her wallet and identification fully intact. There were no signs of a struggle, no broken glass, no drops of blood, and absolutely no security footage to indicate how a human being could be instantly deleted from one of the busiest sectors of Dallas. It was a terrifyingly clean erasure, a modern urban mystery that defied every traditional law enforcement protocol and instantly birthed the most baffling Dallas cold case of the 21st century. Sirens wailed through the humid night air as elite homicide detectives flooded the grid, their flashlights cutting through the structural shadows of the concrete garage, but finding absolutely nothing to point a finger into the void. Paranoia gripped the city like a vice as rumors spread that a highly calculated, invisible predator was hunting in the heart of the entertainment district, selecting his targets with lethal precision and vanishing before the smoke could clear. For over 20 years, that empty parking space remained an open wound, a silent monument to forensic failure, while the investigation stalled, grew cold, and was eventually buried under the crushing weight of newer tragedies. But time is an unpredictable beast, and secrets have a way of clawing their way out of the dark when the human body begins to fail, waiting for the ultimate reckoning to shatter a community's reality all over again. Tonight, the 20-year silence is violently broken, the ancient files are ripped open, and a sudden, earth-shattering development completely rewrites the history of a crime that Dallas could never forget. The neighborhood of Deep Ellum in 2005 was a vibrant, chaotic maze of historic brick warehouses, live music venues, tattoo parlors, and crowded bars, a place where thousands of people mingled beneath the flashing marquee lights every weekend. When Sabrina Vance dissolved into that crowded landscape, the illusion of safety within the urban nightlife scene was instantly incinerated, replaced by a heavy, suffocating atmosphere of mutual suspicion. Detectives systematically canvassed every establishment, interviewing bartenders, bouncers, transient workers, and parking attendants, searching desperately for a single pair of eyes that had tracked her final footsteps through the dark. But the human canvassing yielded a frustrating, absolute zero. The overwhelming sensory overload of the weekend crowds had created a perfect wall of noise and distraction that completely camouflaged the abduction. Forensic teams combed through her vehicle, applying primitive digital extraction tools to her phone records and searching for latent fingerprints or stray fibers that might belong to an uninvited guest. Every tip that flooded the police hotline led to an immediate dead end. Every suspected vehicle turned out to be a false alarm. Every shadow in the multi-story garage remained a phantom. The complete lack of physical evidence forced investigators to face a terrifying reality. They were dealing with someone who moved through the city like a ghost, someone who understood the blind spots of modern surveillance and executed his crimes with surgical precision. Months bled into grueling, silent years, and the initial frenzied energy of the investigation slowly cooled into the agonizing stagnation of a frozen folder, leaving Sabrina's family to drown in a perpetual purgatory of unanswered questions. Her parents spent their life savings on private investigators, refused to alter her childhood bedroom, and kept a continuous vigil by the telephone, praying for a breakthrough that seemed increasingly impossible as the years marched relentlessly forward. The file grew thick with useless reports, dead-end leads, and heartbreaking letters from a community paralyzed by fear, before being boxed up, labeled, and buried in the basement archives of police headquarters. By the arrival of the mid-2010s, the Vance disappearance had transitioned from an active investigation into a legendary, unresolvable mystery that defined the limitations of early digital-era forensics. The world outside changed dramatically. Technology leaped forward, data analytics evolved, and security networks became ubiquitous, yet the evidence from 2005 remained locked in stasis, a static collection of old photographs and yellowed notes. Generation after generation of cold case investigators would occasionally pull the dusty box from the dark shelves, staring at Sabrina's smiling portrait, searching for the microscopic flaw in the original timeline that had allowed a monster to escape into the free air. Paranoia within Deep Ellum gradually faded into a distant, historical scar, but the trauma had permanently altered the security infrastructure of the city, forcing the installation of high-definition camera grids and panic buttons throughout the parking facilities. Sabrina's mother passed away without ever learning the fate of her daughter, her heart completely broken by a decade of silence, leaving only her younger brother, Julian, to carry the heavy torch of justice into a new era of technology. Julian refused to let his sister's memory be erased by the passage of time, launching online campaigns and consistently pressure the cold case squad to apply newly developed forensic tools to the ancient physical evidence. But without a fresh lead, a body, or a definitive forensic match, the state's case remained an unassailable fortress of doubt, a tragic puzzle waiting for a catalyst that no one could have possibly predicted. The catalyst did not emerge from a laboratory breakthrough, a sudden DNA match, or a meticulously planned police raid, but from the sterile, hushed confines of an intensive care unit at a local hospital in late 2025. A 74-year-old man named Marcus Montgomery, a retired logistics manager who had lived a quiet, seemingly blameless life in the Dallas suburbs, was entering the final stages of terminal organ failure. To his family, his neighbors, and his church community, Montgomery was a gentle, unassuming senior citizen, a man who spent his retirement gardening and volunteering at youth centers, completely detached from the criminal world. But as the monitors ticked down his final heartbeats and the weight of eternity pressed heavily against his chest, the psychological walls that had protected his dark secrets for 20 years began to fracture completely. Surrounded by his stunned adult children, Montgomery requested the immediate presence of a police stenographer and a homicide detective, stating that he could not cross the threshold of death while carrying the crushing weight of an unsolved nightmare. When the veteran cold case detective arrived at the bedside, notebook in hand, the dying man wet his cracked lips and began to deliver a Don Dap, rapid-fire confession that would instantly shatter 20 years of investigative assumptions and send shockwaves through the entire Dallas Police Department. The deathbed confession of Marcus Montgomery was not a vague, emotional plea for forgiveness. It was a chilling, hyper-detailed masterclass in criminal logistics that completely rewrote the history of the 2005 investigation. Dressed in the sterile gown of a hospital patient, his voice a low, gravelly rasp that was captured by a digital recording array, Montgomery detailed the exact mechanics of an urban hunting campaign that had targeted Sabrina Vance. He revealed that his employment as a regional logistics manager in 2005 had granted him unrestricted, unquestioned access to a fleet of commercial delivery vans and private corporate parking spaces directly adjacent to the Deep Ellum Entertainment District. On the night of August 12, 2005, he had not been a random drifter lurking in the shadows. He had been sitting inside a fully marked corporate vehicle, utilizing his official uniform and a professional clipboard to completely blend into the industrial background of the parking garage. He had watched Sabrina approach her vehicle, calculating the exact moment she entered the blind spot of the facility's primitive security layout, before stepping out to execute a terrifyingly efficient, low-profile abduction that left absolutely no physical trace behind. With sickening, architectural precision, Montgomery explained how his official uniform had acted as the ultimate psychological camouflage, completely bypassing Sabrina's natural survival instincts for the critical seconds necessary to close the physical distance between them. He had approached her under the guise of a corporate facility manager, politely informing her that her vehicle was parked in a restricted commercial loading zone and presenting his clipboard to document a fictitious parking violation. The banality of the interaction completely disarmed her defenses, causing her to step away from her car door and lean closer to look at the paperwork, entirely oblivious to the danger that was tracking her every micro-movement. In a fraction of a second, Montgomery had lunged forward with explosive, practiced violence, using his immense physical size to overpower her and force a chemical-soaked rag over her mouth before she could utter a single scream or launch a desperate struggle. He had loaded her unconscious body into the rear cargo bay of his corporate van, locked her personal vehicle to delay the police timeline, and calmly driven out of the multi-story garage past the security gates, completely invisible to the investigators who would swarm the perimeter just 12 hours later. The confession grew increasingly horrific as Montgomery detailed the final hours of Sabrina's life, a narrative delivered with a flat, detached clinical tone that made the blood of the listening detectives run cold. He revealed that he had transported her to an abandoned, corporate-owned distribution warehouse in the industrial outskirts of West Dallas, a facility that was scheduled for complete structural demolition and concrete resurfacing the following Monday. He had ended her life within hours of the abduction, using a heavy utility cord, before utilizing his authority as a logistics coordinator to conceal her remains in the one place he knew would never be disturbed by future developments. He had placed her body deep within the negative space of a massive, reinforced concrete foundation trench that was being poured for the installation of an industrial boiler system, personally supervising the pouring of thousands of pounds of high-strength cement over the site at dawn. He had literally built his crime into the very industrial infrastructure of Dallas, transforming a commercial warehouse into an invisible, permanent tomb that had stood entirely undetected while the city modernized and expanded around his sins. The immediate fallout from the deathbed confession triggered a massive, high-intensity forensic mobilization in the industrial sectors of West Dallas, shattering the morning peace of a commercial zone with the roaring arrival of heavy excavation equipment. A multi-agency task force, now officially operating under the banner of the Dallas 2005 Cold Case Solved, descended upon the active commercial property, forcing the immediate evacuation of a multi-million-dollar manufacturing facility that had been constructed over the old warehouse foundation. Structural engineers, forensic anthropologists, and state police investigators, all clad in white Tyvek suits, began the painstaking process of scanning the reinforced concrete floor with high-frequency ground-penetrating radar arrays. The digital monitors quickly confirmed Montgomery's dying words, revealing a distinct structural anomaly embedded deep within the older layers of aggregate stone and steel mesh, a hidden pocket of history waiting to be pulled into the light. The high-pitched, deafening screech of diamond-tipped industrial saws tearing into the ancient concrete echoed through the facility, a mechanical cry for justice that marked the violent end of a 20-year lie. For Julian Vance, the sudden, shocking resolution of his sister's case brought an overwhelming wave of emotional vertigo that completely upended his reality, transforming him from a quietly grieving advocate into the center of a national media storm. Standing behind the heavy yellow police tape at the excavation site, his eyes fixed on the heavy machinery breaking apart the concrete, he felt the crushing weight of a 20-year search finally lift from his chest, leaving behind a vast, solemn emptiness. At the televised press conference later that afternoon, the chief of police officially announced that the 2005 cold case was solved, displaying side-by-side images of Sabrina's vintage missing poster and the high-resolution scans of the industrial excavation site that had brought down a monster's legacy. The announcement sent an electric jolt of disbelief through the city of Dallas, proving to a stunned public that no matter how deep a secret is buried beneath the stone, the truth possesses an unyielding, elemental force that can outlast the human heart. The psychological impact of the discovery completely transformed the community of Deep Ellum and the surrounding suburbs, forcing citizens to confront the terrifying reality that a systematic predator had lived, worked, and smiled in their midst for 2 decades without ever drawing a single glance from the law. The case underscored a dark, historical truth about the early digital era, exposing how a highly organized offender could leverage corporate access, official uniforms, and structural blind spots to execute an urban abduction with total impunity. As the forensic teams working under the floodlights finally breached the central core of the concrete foundation, unearthing the fragile, preserved remains of Sabrina Vance alongside her missing keys, the long shadow of 2005 was officially dispelled from the city. The empty parking space that had haunted a family for 20 years had finally yielded its answers, leaving behind a permanent, sobering reminder that while justice can be delayed by a generation, the code of human life cannot be permanently erased by the stone, and the voices of the dead will eventually find a way to be heard in the light of day. The mechanical hum of the industrial air filtration units vibrated through the cavernous metal framing of the West Dallas manufacturing facility, filling the humid Texas air with a tense, clinical weight. For 20 years, This specific coordinate on the city map had been nothing more than an unyielding block of commercial real estate, a bustling hub of modern supply chains where hundreds of laborers worked daily shifts completely oblivious to the horror anchored beneath their boots. But as the diamond-tipped blades of the massive walk-behind concrete saws bit into the multi-layered aggregate floor, releasing a thick, gray plume of pulverized stone dust, the physical geometry of a 20-year deception began to shatter. A specialized unit of FBI recovery specialists, state police forensic anthropologists, and county medical examiners stood gathered around the chalk-lined perimeter, their faces illuminated by the harsh, unblinking glare of portable halogen light towers that turned the windowless industrial interior into a high-intensity theater of historical reckoning. The engineering schematics required to execute this recovery operation without triggering a catastrophic structural failure of the active manufacturing plant were incredibly complex, demanding a level of architectural calculation that rivaled the original construction of the warehouse. Marcus Montgomery's deathbed confession had not been a generalized, sweeping gesture. His dying mind had retained the exact, cold measurements of the foundation grid, directing investigators to a load-bearing column situated directly between two high-voltage electrical transformers. A single errant blow from a heavy pneumatic jackhammer or an uncontrolled fracture spreading through the underlying post-tension cables could cause the entire multi-ton floor slab to warp, potentially bringing down the structural ceiling supports and destroying the fragile, biological evidence trapped in the dark since August 2005. Technicians systematically mapped out the dense concrete network with specialized, high-frequency radar arrays, transforming the physical mass of the floor into a digital map of contrasting densities that clearly define the irregular, hand-excavated trench where Montgomery had poured his sins. Outside the secure industrial compound, behind the triple-layered rings of heavy yellow crime scene tape that sealed off the commercial avenue, a massive sea of media trucks, legal analysts, and curious onlookers braved the stifling heat of the Dallas afternoon. The sudden, explosive revelation that a quiet, retired logistics manager had used his corporate identity to camouflage a brutal urban abduction had completely paralyzed the public consciousness, dominating every local and national news broadcast under the Dawn DAP, rapid-fire banner. The Foundation Vault. Dallas 2005 cold case exploded. The narrative of Sabrina Vance's disappearance was no longer a distant, historical phantom that belonged to a different era of the city's nightlife. It had transformed into an active, bleeding legal crisis that forced a modern community to re-examine the very ground they walked upon through a lens of pure, unadulterated terror. Livelong's friends of the Montgomery family sat frozen in front of their television screens in the quiet suburbs, trying to reconcile the image of the gentle, church-going grandfather who organized neighborhood block parties with the stomach-turning reality of a meticulous predator who carried his trophies in a locked iron box behind his garage workbench. Inside the excavation zone, the high-pitched, deafening scream of the industrial concrete saws finally ceased, replaced by the low, rhythmic scratching of hand trowels and delicate nylon brushes as the forensic anthropologists stepped down into the newly cut structural trench. The work shifted from industrial demolition to a slow, reverent surgical extraction, with every individual fragment of aggregate stone and wire mesh being meticulously catalogued, weighed, and subjected to chemical evaluation to ensure an unbreakable chain of custody for the historic grand jury presentation to come. The air in the lower excavation pit grew increasingly cool and damp, smelling heavily of ancient limestone, calcified moisture, and the unmistakable, sweet tang of old soil that had been sealed away from the atmospheric elements since the golden age of the early digital era. As the final structural layer of reinforced mesh was carefully snipped away with industrial bolt cutters, exposing the dense, dark clay of the original 2005 trench matrix, the specialized cadaver dog units alerted immediately, their low, mournful whines echoing off the corrugated metal walls of the facility and signaling the definitive end of a 20-year hunt. While the physical recovery team in West Dallas slowly pulled the past into the light, a secondary, equally intense investigative offensive was unfolding inside the secure, heavily guarded digital forensics lab at police headquarters, where analysts were systematically dissecting the contents of Montgomery's hidden iron ammunition box. The collection of vintage newspaper clippings, scratched jewelry pieces, and personal effects was no longer viewed as a static archive of a single tragedy. It was treated as an active serial ledger, a physical record of an undetected predator's hunting campaign across the state of Texas. A dedicated team of behavioral profilers and regional cold case detectives worked through the night, using advanced digital enhancement tools to analyze a heavily faded, water-damaged collection of student identification cards and unique personal ornaments that had been found stashed beneath Sabrina Vance's stolen car keys. Among the recovered tokens, a delicate gold charm bracelet with a distinct, custom-engraved horse pendant became the primary focus of an intense, multi-agency data match that quickly expanded the boundaries of the 2005 investigation into a multi-jurisdictional serial homicide inquiry. By using high-powered macrophotography to isolate a microscopic manufacturing stamp on the bracelet's clasp, analysts managed to trace the specific piece of jewelry back to an independent boutique that had operated in downtown Austin during the late 1990s. When investigators cross-referenced Montgomery's historical corporate travel logs and commercial shipping manifests from his early career with the regional missing persons archives of Travis County, a terrifying, chronological symmetry began to lock into place on the digital war room maps, pointing directly toward a legendary, unresolvable mystery from the summer of 1999. The name that emerged from the digital dragnet was 17-year-old high school track star Marissa Estrada, who had completely dissolved into the night air while walking home from a community sports complex in July 1999, leaving behind an investigation that had remained entirely frozen for 27 years. Marissa's vehicle had been found parked perfectly near the entrance of a public park, keys missing, her personal belongings untouched on the driver's seat, and her running shoes neatly arranged on the floorboards, a chillingly clean erasure that mirrored the exact mechanics of the Sabrina Vance abduction down to the smallest detail. The original 1999 Austin police response had been a massive, chaotic scramble that ultimately led to a brick wall, with local authorities operating under the tragic assumption that Marissa had been targeted by a transient hitchhiker or had run away to Houston, entirely missing the corporate logistics coordinator who was managing a regional warehouse expansion project less than 3 blocks from the park. Back in the West Dallas manufacturing facility, the forensic anthropologists working under the intense halogen lights made their final, somber breakthrough, carefully clearing away the last remaining pockets of compacted clay to reveal the structural outlines of a clandestine grave. Wrapped tightly within the degraded, industrial-grade plastic sheeting that Montgomery had described in his dying breath, they located the skeletal remains of Sabrina Vance, her hands still crossed over her chest in a tragic posture of forced finality, and her missing corporate access badge still pinned to her tattered clothing. The long, agonizing cycle of uncertainty that had defined Julian Vance's entire adult life was officially brought to a shattering, definitive close, her story finally salvaged from the concrete by the unyielding, generational march of modern criminal justice. But as the medical examiner's transport vehicle slowly pulled away from the West Dallas perimeter under a heavy police escort, the exhausted detectives back in the war room knew their work was far from finished. The iron ammunition box still held 2 more pieces of unidentified history, 2 more silent cries for help waiting patiently for the light to break through the stone. The forensic recovery of Sabrina Vance's remains from beneath the factory floor was a massive breakthrough, but inside the Dallas police headquarters, the atmosphere remained intensely focused. The timeline had shifted. This was no longer an isolated 2005 cold case. It had transformed into a complex, multi-jurisdictional hunt for a serial predator whose historical footprint stretched across the state of Texas. The deathbed confession of Marcus Montgomery had acted as a skeletal key, unlocking a decades-old vault of secrets, but his death left investigators with an unyielding challenge. They had to decode the remaining trophies in the iron ammunition box without the killer's voice to guide them. The Specialized Task Force, now operating under the banner of Operation Deathbed Reckoning, focused their full analytical power on the delicate gold charm bracelet with the engraved horse pendant. Under the high-powered stereo microscopes of the State Forensic Laboratory, microanalysts detected minute scratching along the edges of the horse charm, identifying a faint jeweler's mark that pointed directly toward a boutique in downtown Austin. When digital analysts cross-referenced this asset with historical corporate shipping manifests, they confirmed that Montgomery had been managing a regional warehouse expansion in Travis County during the summer of 1999, the exact window when 17-year-old Marissa Estrada vanished without a trace. The original 1999 case file from Austin arrived at the Dallas precinct via a high-priority digital transfer, its yellow documents and graining Polaroids painting a familiar, devastating picture of predatory precision. Marissa had been a stellar high school athlete, a young woman whose life was defined by dedication and structure, who had simply vanished into the warm evening air after an elite training session at a community sports complex. Her vehicle had been found parked cleanly near the entrance of a public park, keys missing, her personal belongings untouched on the passenger seat, and her track shoes neatly arranged on the floorboards, a chillingly clean erasure that mirrored the exact logistics of the Sabrina Vance abduction down to the smallest detail. Detectives Marcus Hayes and Evelyn Vance sat in the war room, surrounded by digitized maps of Austin's industrial corridors from the late 1990s. "Look at the spatial correlation," Detective Hayes said, tracing a glowing blue line along the vintage digital screen. The Regional Distribution Center Montgomery was building in 99, sits directly adjacent to the rail line that runs behind the sports complex. He didn't just stumble across Marissa. He used his evening site inspections to observe the foot traffic, selecting his target from the vantage point of his corporate perimeter. The realization was chilling. Montgomery had used the chaos and heavy machinery of a major industrial expansion project to mask a calculated, predatory campaign that had completely evaded the local police for 27 years. To verify the connection beyond a shadow of a doubt, the task force deployed advanced touch DNA extraction methods to the gold charm bracelet, utilizing vacuum-assisted collection tubes to pull microscopic skin cell material from the deep grooves of the custom engraving. The laboratory technicians worked through the night, processing the fragile genetic material through high-density sequencers and running a direct comparison against the elimination samples provided by the Estrada family. The results sent an immediate shockwave through the entire department. It was an absolute, undeniable match. The biological profile trapped within the jewelry matched Marissa Estrada's DNA profile with a mathematical certainty of 99.9%. The trophy had officially found its name, shifting the legal strategy from a localized Dallas murder case into a massive, statewide serial homicide prosecution. While the forensic link was being solidified in the laboratory, a specialized field team was dispatched to Austin to locate the structural graveyard where Montgomery had hidden Marissa's remains. Guided by his corporate logs, investigators focused their attention on the old distribution center, which had since been converted into a high-security document storage facility owned by a multinational financial firm. Structural engineers deployed ground-penetrating radar arrays across the massive concrete loading docks, scanning the reinforced layers of stone and steel mesh for any subsurface anomalies that corresponded with the construction schedule of July 1999. Within 6 hours of continuous scanning, the radar monitors flashed a distinct, high-contrast silhouette embedded deep within the older foundation layers, a hidden cavity situated directly beneath a massive, load-bearing concrete retaining wall. The public announcement of the Austin connection triggered a massive wave of profound horror and validation across the state, completely dominating every major media network under the Don DAP, rapid-fire banner. Austin 1999 cold case solved. The warehouse vault exposed. The realization that a systematic predator had used his corporate authority to build an invisible cemetery into the very commercial infrastructure of Texas shattered the public's remaining sense of safety, driving thousands of citizens to demand immediate security audits of historical industrial construction sites. Outside the Dallas precinct, the permanent encampment of satellite trucks and true crime advocates grew to an unprecedented size, transforming the post-confession investigation into one of the most heavily monitored legal events of the 21st century. For Julian Vance, the resolution of the Austin case brought an intense, empathetic connection to a family he had never met, transforming his personal grief into a unified mission for multi-generational justice. He spent his evenings on the phone with Marissa's aging brother, sharing the unique, sobering perspective that only someone who had spent 2 decades looking into the dark could truly understand. The concrete didn't protect his secrets forever, Julian told him, his eyes fixed on the rain-slicked Dallas streets below his window. The science has caught up with his crimes, and our sisters are finally being pulled out of the shadows. We're going to finish this story completely, piece by piece, until the entire ledger is clear. As night fell over the West Dallas precinct, the task force turned their attention to the final 2 items remaining inside the iron ammunition box, a weathered silver locket containing a microscopic portrait of an elderly couple and a tattered, child-sized pair of sunglasses with a distinct pink frame. The successful resolution of the Vance and Estrada files had proven that Montgomery's double life was built on a foundation of absolute, mathematical precision, leaving behind a trail of physical breadcrumbs that were finally being decoded by modern science. The gears of Operation Deathbed Reckoning continued to grind forward without a single pause, the light of modern technology systematically tearing through 30 years of darkness to claim the stolen names of the dead. The screech of commercial concrete core drills cutting through the heavily reinforced foundation of the Austin Document Storage Facility was deafening, a brutal, high-pitched mechanical wail that echoed off the massive steel racking systems and corrugated metal ceilings. Under the relentless glare of high-intensity portable halogen lamps, a team of specialized recovery technicians, forensic engineers, and archaeologists from the Texas Department of Public Safety worked in absolute, focused synchronization. For 27 years, a load-bearing retaining wall beneath the facility's commercial loading docks had stood as an unyielding block of gray industrial concrete, entirely masking the horror anchored deep within its core. The structural blueprint of this recovery operation was a high-stakes balancing act. The massive walls supported thousands of tons of structural roofing, meaning a single miscalculated fracture or an uncontrolled split in the post-tension steel cables could cause the upper warehouse levels to collapse inward, instantly destroying the fragile, historical evidence trapped below since July 1999. Forensic anthropologists, clad in white Tyvek suits and protective respirators, monitored the digital output of acoustic sensors that had been mounted directly to the concrete face to track any microshifts in load-bearing tension. As the industrial drill bits finally pulled back, extracting perfect cylinders of aggregate stone and wire mesh, the specialized vacuum extraction systems began to clear away the dense, gray plumes of toxic concrete dust that filled the lower excavation pit. Utilizing delicate hand trowels, fine nylon brushes, and surgical-grade dental picks, the anthropologists stepped down into the newly breached structural cavity, systematically clearing away the ancient layers of river rock and dry Texan clay that had been sealed away from the atmosphere since the late 20th century. Within hours of painstaking manual labor, the team located the unmistakable structural outlines of a clandestine grave, unearthing the fragile, skeletal remains of Marissa Estrada, her wrists still securely bound with heavy industrial zip ties, and the tarnished remains of her high school track medals still resting flat against her sternum. The definitive recovery of Marissa Estrada from the Austin Foundation marked the second historical success for Operation Deathbed Reckoning, but back inside the secure, heavily guarded war room at Dallas Police Headquarters, the atmosphere remained intensely clinical and devoid of any celebratory relief. The calendar on the wall marked the summer of 2026, and the multi-jurisdictional task force knew that with Marcus Montgomery now deceased, the state's legal window to permanently close these cases depended entirely on compiling an unassailable, mathematically indisputable archive of forensic truth for the grand jury record. The third trophy from the hidden iron ammunition box was now placed beneath the intense magnification of the laboratory's stereo microscopes, a heavily tarnished silver locket containing a microscopic, faded black and white photographic portrait of an elderly couple from the early 1960s. Unlike the previous items, which possessed distinct jeweler stamps or custom-engraved monograms, this locket was an intimate, generic family heirloom, offering absolutely no immediate digital or manufacturing clues to the identity of its original owner. Detectives Hayes and Vance refused to let the trailing mystery stall, deploying a team of digital asset recovery specialists to isolate and enhance the microscopic portrait contained within the silver frame. Using multispectral imaging arrays and advanced pixel density optimization software, technicians systematically stripped away decades of moisture damage, silver oxidation, and fading, digitally reconstructing the facial geometry of the elderly couple with absolute clarity. The restored digital profiles were immediately uploaded into national genealogical databases, historical public census records, and regional archival networks across the state of Texas, searching for a familial match that could bridge the gap between 2026 and the forgotten missing persons anomalies of the late 20th century. By mid-June, the digital dragnet returned a massive, high-priority connection, tracing the ancestral bloodline of the couple in the photograph directly toward a prominent farming family that had operated in the rural coastal flatlands of Corpus Christi. Following this specific genealogical branch forward through public records and marriage registries, investigators discovered that the couple had only one direct descendant who had vanished during the early 1990s, a 21-year-old agricultural science student named Clara Moreno, who had completely dissolved into the night air in September 1992. Clara had been a brilliant university researcher, a young woman whose life was defined by predictability and a deep connection to her family, who had vanished while driving back to her campus dormitory after a late-night research project at an experimental crop field. Her vehicle had been found parked cleanly on the unpaved shoulder of a rural state highway, driver's side door securely locked, her keys missing, and her research journals resting safely on the passenger seat, a chillingly clean erasure that mirrored the exact mechanical choreography of both the Vance and Estrada abductions. The original 1992 Corpus Christi police response had been a chaotic, dead-end scramble that ultimately led to a brick wall, with local authorities operating under the tragic assumption that Clara had been targeted by a transient hitchhiker or had accidentally drowned in the fast-moving waters of the adjacent shipping channels, completely missing the corporate logistics coordinator who was managing a major regional distribution expansion project less than 2 miles from the campus. The geographic and chronological cross-reference compiled by the Dallas Task Force was immediate, absolute, and thoroughly chilling, placing Marcus Montgomery directly at the center of the Corpus Christi abduction zone during the exact week Clara Moreno disappeared. In September 1992, Montgomery's commercial firm had been awarded a highly lucrative corporate contract to pour the massive concrete foundations and subterranean drainage networks for a state-of-the-art agricultural shipping hub located directly along the path Clara took on the night she vanished. The proximity was a masterclass in predatory camouflage. Montgomery's work crews operated on a strict night shift schedule to minimize disruption to daytime commercial traffic, granting him completely unrestricted, unquestioned access to the darkened, isolated rural highway corridors during the exact hours Clara was driving home. For 34 long years, the Moreno family had tortured themselves with the agonizing theory of an accidental drowning, entirely oblivious to the fact that a highly disciplined serial predator had built his crime directly into the very infrastructure designed to modernize their agricultural community. To verify the connection beyond a shadow of a scientific doubt, forensic technicians applied ultra-sensitive vacuum-assisted collection tubes to the interior of the silver locket, pulling microscopic skin cell material and sweat residue from the deep grooves of the internal portrait frame where the original owner would have pressed her fingers. The laboratory processed the fragile genetic profile through high-density sequencers, running a direct comparison against the elimination samples provided by Clara's aging sisters. The digital analysis returned an absolute, undeniable match. The biological signature trapped within the locket matched Clara Moreno's family profile with a mathematical certainty of 99.9%, officially claiming the third name from the Iron Ledger. The public announcement of the Corpus Christi connection triggered a massive wave of profound horror and outrage across the state of Texas, dominating every major news network under the Don Dapp rapid-fire banner. The infrastructure killer exposed, Corpus Christi 1992 cold case solved. The viral paranoia that had gripped the urban nightlife of Deep Ellum and the commercial zones of Austin had now expanded into the rural agricultural sectors of the state, forcing a profound public reckoning as citizens began to realize that the very highways they drove on, the bridges they crossed, and the shipping infrastructure they relied upon had been built by a predator who used his professional access to create an invisible network of tombs. Outside the Dallas precinct, the permanent encampment of media trucks, legal experts, and true crime advocates reached an unprecedented magnitude, transforming Operation Deathbed Reckoning into the most significant and heavily monitored forensic investigation of the 21st century. Julian Vance stood tall at the center of the media storm, his presence a powerful, silent anchor for the swelling crowds of victims' families who were finally stepping out of the dark purgatory of perpetual uncertainty and into the blinding, unyielding light of absolute truth, proving to a watching nation that while a killer can use concrete, steel, and time to bury his sins, the relentless march of modern science possesses an elemental force that will eventually crack the stone and demand a final, definitive account. The heavy mechanical growl of an industrial concrete demolition excavator tore through the salty, humid air of the Corpus Christi shipping corridor, systematically dismantling an obsolete commercial grain silo foundation that had stood undisturbed since the autumn of 1992. Under the blazing, unrelenting coastal sun, a specialized forensic recovery team from the Texas Department of Public Safety stood watch as the heavy hydraulic shears sliced through decades-old reinforced steel and thick military-grade cement. For 34 years, this massive block of weather-beaten aggregate stone had sat embedded within the shipping infrastructure of the Gulf Coast, a silent monument to industrial expansion that completely masked a horrific secret anchored deep within its core. A small army of state police investigators, forensic anthropologists, and medical examiner technicians, all clad in stark white Tyvek suits and protective respirators, stood positioned around the chalk-lined perimeter, their faces drawn tight with an intense, solemn determination to reclaim a stolen future. The technical and structural challenges of this specific recovery operation were immensely complex, demanding a level of architectural calculation that pushed the boundaries of modern forensic engineering to its absolute limits. Marcus Montgomery's deathbed confession records had meticulously mapped out the geographical layout of his earliest commercial contracts, directing investigators to a specific subterranean drainage junction box situated directly beneath the primary load-bearing foundation wall of the old grain facility. A single miscalculated strike from the heavy demolition equipment, or an uncontrolled fracture spreading through the underlying stone matrix, could cause the surrounding earth to cave inward, instantly destroying the fragile, 34-year-old biological evidence trapped in the dark since September 1992. Technicians systematically monitored the structural density of the site with high-frequency ground-penetrating radar arrays, transforming the physical mass of the concrete into a digital map of contrasting shadows that clearly define the irregular, hand-excavated trench where the predator had poured his sins. Outside the secure maritime facility, behind multiple rings of heavy yellow crime scene tape that blocked off the main commercial avenue, a massive sea of media trucks, legal analysts, and local residents stood huddled together in the stifling coastal heat. The explosive revelation that a systematic killer had used his corporate authority as a logistics manager to build an invisible network of tombs directly into the commercial infrastructure of Texas had completely paralyzed the public consciousness, dominating every local and national news broadcast under the Don DAP, rapid-fire banner. The Infrastructure Vault. Corpus Christi, 1992 cold case solved. The narrative of Clara Moreno's disappearance was no longer a forgotten, historical mystery that belonged to a different era of the city's agricultural history. It had transformed into an active, bleeding legal crisis that forced a modern community to re-examine the very ground they walked upon through a lens of pure, unadulterated terror. Lifelong friends of the Moreno family stood frozen in front of the perimeter, watching as high-powered vacuum extraction systems began to clear away the dense, gray plumes of toxic concrete dust that filled the deep excavation pit. Inside the subterranean junction box, the high-pitched scream of the concrete saws finally ceased, replaced by the low, rhythmic scratching of hand trowels, delicate nylon brushes, and surgical-grade dental picks as the forensic anthropologists stepped down into the newly breached structural cavity. The work shifted from heavy industrial demolition to a slow, reverent surgical extraction, with every individual fragment of aggregate stone and rusted iron rebar being meticulously catalogued, weighed, and subjected to chemical evaluation to ensure an unbreakable chain of custody for the grand jury record. The air in the lower excavation pit grew increasingly cool and damp, smelling heavily of calcified moisture, old salt, limestone dust, and the unmistakable, sweet tang of old soil that had been sealed away from the atmospheric elements since the early 90s. As the final structural layer of reinforced wire mesh was carefully snipped away with industrial bolt cutters, exposing the dense, dark clay of the original 1992 trench matrix, the specialized cadaver dog units alerted immediately, their low, mournful whines echoing off the concrete walls and signaling the definitive end of a 34-year hunt. Working entirely by hand under the blinding glare of portable halogen light towers, the anthropologists systematically cleared away the last remaining pockets of compacted coastal clay to reveal the structural outlines of a clandestine grave. Wrapped tightly within the degraded, industrial-grade plastic sheeting that Montgomery had described in his dying breath, they located the skeletal remains of Clara Moreno, her silver medical alert bracelet still draped loosely around her wrist bone, and her missing university research badge still pinned to her tattered clothing. The long, agonizing cycle of uncertainty that had defined the Moreno family's entire existence was officially brought to a shattering, definitive close, her story finally salvaged from the concrete by the unyielding, generational march of modern criminal justice. But as the medical examiner's transport vehicle slowly pulled away from the Corpus Christi perimeter under a heavy police escort, the exhausted detectives back in the Dallas war room knew their work was far from finished. The iron ammunition box still held one final piece of unidentified history, one last silent cry for help waiting patiently for the light to break through the stone. The task force turned their full, undivided analytical power toward the sixth and final trophy recovered from Montgomery's hidden archive, a tattered, weathered pair of child-sized sunglasses with a distinct pink plastic frame and one severely fractured lens. Unlike the jewelry pieces, which could be rationalized as valuable tokens or random hoarding, these child-sized sunglasses represented a sudden, violent theft of an innocent perspective, a physical testament to a crime that had undoubtedly targeted the most vulnerable segment of the population. The microforensics unit spent hours scanning the pink plastic frames with high-powered lasers and multispectral imaging arrays, searching for batch manufacturing serial numbers, specific optical lens grinding signatures, or historical prescription markers that could bridge the gap between 2026 and the forgotten missing persons logs of the late 20th century. The breakthrough did not come from an automated database match, but from a meticulous, manual review of microfilm school registries, public census records, and regional police archives from the rural logging and industrial communities that bordered the East Texas piney woods. By cross-referencing Montgomery's historical corporate travel logs and commercial warehouse delivery manifests from his early career in the late 1980s, investigators located a forgotten, high-priority missing child report from October 1987. An 8-year-old girl named Becky Evans, the daughter of a local paper mill worker, had vanished from her front yard tire swing in the sleepy, isolated town of Lufkin, Texas, during the exact week Montgomery was managing a major commercial freight expansion project less than a half-mile from the child's home. The original 1987 investigation had been a chaotic, frantic disaster, with local authorities focused entirely on the theory of a wild animal attack or an accidental drowning in the rushing waters of the adjacent Angelino River, completely missing the disciplined corporate logistics coordinator who was operating heavy equipment in their own backyard. To verify the connection beyond a shadow of a scientific doubt, forensic technicians applied advanced touch DNA extraction methods to the interior hinges of the pink plastic frames, utilizing vacuum-assisted collection tubes to pull microscopic skin cell material from the tiny crevices where the child would have repeatedly pressed her fingers while putting them on. The laboratory processed the fragile genetic profile through high-density sequencers, running a direct comparison against the elimination samples provided by Becky's aging mother, who still lived in the same weathered house in Lufkin. The digital analysis returned an absolute, undeniable match. The biological signature trapped within the plastic frames matched Becky Evans' maternal profile with a mathematical certainty of 99.9%, officially claiming the final name from the Iron Ledger and completing the horrific checklist of Montgomery's hidden history. The public announcement of the Lufkin connection triggered a massive wave of profound horror and deep, visceral fury across the entire state of Texas, dominating every major news network under the Don Dap, rapid-fire banner. The Timber Tomb. Lufkin 1987 child cold case solved. The realization that Montgomery's predatory timeline had initiated even earlier than previously believed, targeting an innocent child in a rural community before expanding into the urban nightlife of Dallas and Austin, completely shattered the public's remaining sense of safety. Outside the Dallas precinct, the permanent encampment of media trucks, legal analysts, and true crime advocates reached an unprecedented magnitude, transforming Operation Deathbed Reckoning into the most significant and heavily monitored forensic investigation of the 21st century. Julian Vance stood tall at the center of the media storm, his face a mask of deep physical exhaustion but absolute, unyielding resolve, his eyes fixed firmly on the horizon as the unified task force prepared to execute the final, definitive recovery operation in the East Texas woods, proving to a watching world that while a killer can use concrete, steel, and time to bury his sins, the truth possesses an elemental force that will eventually crack the foundation and demand absolute accountability in the light of day. The heavy mechanical rumble of a diesel-powered concrete core drill sliced through the morning silence of the East Texas piney woods, its high-pitched screech echoing off the towering loblolly pines like a frantic cry for justice. Under a bleak, slate-gray sky in June 2026, a specialized team of state police forensic technicians, structural engineers, and forensic anthropologists stood gathered around the moss-covered foundation of an abandoned industrial pumping station just outside the Lufkin town limits. For 39 long years, this massive block of weather-beaten aggregate stone had sat embedded within the dense wilderness, a silent, industrial relic completely forgotten by the modern world, entirely masking a horrific secret anchored deep within its core. The structural blueprint of this final recovery operation was a high-stakes balancing act. The decaying brick walls of the superstructure hung precariously over the excavation zone, meaning a single miscalculated fracture or an uncontrolled split in the concrete slab could cause the entire facility to collapse inward, instantly destroying the fragile, historical evidence trapped below since October 1987. Forensic anthropologists, clad in white Tyvek suits and protective respirators, systematically monitored the digital output of acoustic sensors that had been mounted directly to the masonry face to track any microshifts in structural tension. As the industrial drill bits finally pulled back, extracting perfect, cylindrical columns of aggregate stone and rusted iron rebar, the specialized vacuum extraction systems began to clear away the dense, gray plumes of toxic concrete dust that filled the lower excavation pit. Utilizing delicate hand trowels, fine nylon brushes, and surgical-grade dental picks, the anthropologists stepped down into the newly breached structural cavity, systematically clearing away the ancient layers of river rock and damp Texan clay that had been sealed away from the atmospheric elements since the late 20th century. Within hours of painstaking manual labor under the blinding glare of portable halogen light towers, the team located the unmistakable structural outlines of a clandestine grave, unearthing the fragile, skeletal remains of 8-year-old Becky Evans, the tiny pink plastic fragments of her missing hair barrettes still resting flat against her skull bone. The definitive recovery of Becky Evans from the Lufkin infrastructure vault marked the sixth and final historical success for Operation Deathbed Reckoning, bringing an end to the physical recovery phase of an unprecedented multi-agency hunt. Back inside the secure, heavily guarded war room at Dallas Police Headquarters, the atmosphere remained intensely clinical and focused as the task force prepared to transition the case from an active field investigation into a permanent, unassailable archive of judicial truth for the grand jury record. The massive digital map that had once been crowded with unconfirmed corporate travel timelines, anonymous DNA profiles, and red pushpins was now a locked, definitive blueprint of absolute criminal accountability. 6 victims, spanning 4 decades of Texas history, had been systematically pulled from their hidden concrete tombs, their identities fully restored by the unyielding application of modern forensic genomics and investigative tracking. The legal architects from multiple state Supreme Courts, District attorney offices and federal branches gathered around the central conference table, their expressions drawn and serious as they prepared the final, historic omnibus indictment against Marcus Montgomery's estate and his potential institutional enablers. Even though the primary predator was deceased, the justice system refused to allow the investigation to fade into a historical footnote, pivoting their attention toward a comprehensive evaluation of how Montgomery's corporate access had insulated him from suspicion for 40 years. The prosecution team worked through the night, compiling a massive, compounding mountain of scientific, physical, and circumstantial proof designed to serve as a permanent legal record, ensuring that no historical revisionism could ever obscure the absolute certainty of his monstrosity. The strategy developed by the unified legal team was a masterclass in compounding forensic pressure, anchored firmly in the physical reality of the evidence bags sitting beneath the laboratory lights. Each item pulled from the hidden iron ammunition box, Sabrina's access badge, Marissa's track medals, Clara's silver medical bracelet, and Becky's pink sunglasses, was subjected to intense digital trace analysis to map out Montgomery's micromovements during his decades of isolation. Advanced laser-induced fluorescence imaging revealed microscopic layers of his unique sweat and skin cell oils embedded within the deep scratches of the iron container itself, proving beyond a shadow of a scientific doubt that he had opened and closed the archive hundreds of times over 43 years, using the tokens to relive his moments of absolute control. The data destroyed any remaining public illusions that Montgomery was a reformed senior citizen who had lived a blameless life for 30 years, exposing him instead as an active, disciplined predator who carried his secrets like a toxic ledger deep within the foundation of his home. Outside the granite walls of a federal courthouse, the public spectacle had reached a magnitude that completely paralyzed the surrounding city blocks, drawing thousands of media crews, legal analysts, and ordinary citizens who felt a profound, personal stake in the outcome of the investigation. The media landscape was a nonstop, 24-hour echo chamber of sensational headlines, but behind the flashing television screens and viral true crime podcasts sat a community trying to reckon with a deep, systemic trauma. For Julian Vance, who had spent his entire adult life carrying the crushing weight of his sister's disappearance, the successful resolution of the Lufkin recovery brought an intense wave of emotional exhaustion that transcended the simple, clinical concept of legal victory. He stood before the massive bank of microphones on the courthouse steps, his face a portrait of profound weariness but unyielding resolve, declaring to the world that the time for hiding was officially over. The monster who had spent a lifetime building an empire of secrets beneath the stone was finally brought into the light, and the voices of the dead had finally found their way home. The legal architecture of the posthumous omnibus presentation against the estate and legacy of Marcus Montgomery was finalized under the oppressive humidity of a Dallas midsummer in late June 2026. Inside the high-security federal courthouse in downtown Dallas, the atmosphere crackled with the palpable tension of a historical judicial reckoning as legal teams representing 4 different Texas counties converged to lock the final courtroom doors on a 40-year nightmare. The dynamic of the case, officially designated under the master investigative rubric of the state of Texas v. The estate of Marcus Montgomery and associated corporate entities, had completely shattered the traditional boundaries of criminal law. This was no longer a standard grand jury presentation designed to secure a simple arrest warrant for a living defendant. It had evolved into an unprecedented, historical public tribunal, a clinical, scientifically anchored prosecution of a monster's ghost, executed to permanently establish the absolute forensic truth for the historical record. The legal teams, comprised of veteran federal prosecutors and state district attorneys, had spent weeks constructing a specialized procedural framework designed to preemptively dismantle any future civil or criminal challenges from Montgomery's surviving family members or corporate insurance firms. Their primary target was ensuring the absolute, unassailable admissibility of the investigative genetic genealogy data and the touch DNA profiles that had linked the items inside the iron ammunition box directly to the 6 recovered victims. In a series of comprehensive, highly detailed pre-hearing legal briefs submitted to the grand jury panel, the state laid out a devastating, interlocking matrix of scientific certainties that left absolutely no room for statistical doubt, laboratory error, or claims of environmental contamination. Inside the wood-paneled chambers of Grand Jury Room 4, the presentations stretched into late June, transforming the legal theater into an intense masterclass in advanced bioinformatics, macrophotography, and structural forensic engineering. The lead prosecutor stood before the panel, his voice carrying a flat, commanding resonance that instantly cut through the dense corporate paperwork filling the presentation tables. Behind him, a massive digital display screen illuminated the room with a dawn-dap, rapid-fire sequence of high-resolution laboratory scans, contrasting the microscopic biological markers found on Sabrina Vance's recovered car keys with the pristine, matching DNA sequences pulled from Marcus Montgomery's medical archive. We are not asking this panel to evaluate a collection of vague memories, circumstantial theories, or old police hunches, the prosecutor stated, his eyes locking directly onto the jurors. We are presenting a mathematical equations of absolute guilt, written in the permanent, indelible language of human genomics. Marcus Montgomery believed that by dying in a hospital bed surrounded by his family, he had successfully outrun the reach of Texas justice. He believed that by pouring thousands of tons of commercial-grade concrete over his victims, he had successfully deleted their names from the face of the earth. But the science does not compromise, it does not forget, and it does not recognize the passage of time. The biological code trapped within his hidden archive of trophies matches the DNA profiles of these 6 young women with a statistical certainty that stands at 1 in 7.8 billion. The state's presentation moved systematically from the microscopic certainty of the genomics data to the crushing, visceral reality of the physical trophies recovered from behind the false wall of the suburban basement workshop. One by one, senior forensic trace analysts took the witness stand, displaying the airtight biohazard containment bags that held the tangible remnants of 6 stolen futures: Sabrina's corporate access badge, Marissa's high school track medals, Clara's silver medical alert bracelet, and Becky's pink plastic sunglasses with the fractured lens. Each individual artifact was subjected to advanced laser-induced fluorescence imaging, revealing distinct, overlapping layers of Montgomery's unique sweat and skin cell oils embedded deep within the structural crevices of the items, proving beyond a shadow of a scientific doubt that he had repeatedly handled the tokens over a 40-year period of isolation. The behavioral profilers from the FBI's specialized unit followed the forensic analysts, delivering a chilling, comprehensive breakdown of Montgomery's psychological methodology that completely destroyed any remaining public illusions that he was a reformed, gentle senior citizen. The data demonstrated that the locked iron ammunition box was not a static collection of old memories, but an active, functional engine of sociopathic gratification, a hidden criminal archive that Montgomery utilized to mentally re-execute his abductions in the quiet hours of the night. The absolute precision with which he maintained the structural organization of the trophies, hidden behind rows of mundane carpentry equipment, exposed a highly disciplined, compartmentalized predator who had seamlessly integrated his malicious desires into the very fabric of his ordinary suburban routine. Outside the heavy granite walls of the Dallas courthouse, the public reaction to the unfolding grand jury presentations had reached a state of unprecedented national frenzy, completely paralyzing the surrounding downtown grid with a massive influx of media trucks and citizens. The viral true crime broadcasts and continuous live digital feeds had transformed the case from a localized Texas mystery into a sweeping, cultural reckoning regarding the absolute lack of infrastructural oversight during the late 20th century. The realization that a corporate logistics manager could utilize his official uniforms, marked company vehicles, and unrestricted access to commercial construction sites to execute a statewide hunting campaign with total impunity shattered the public's remaining illusions of security, driving intense demands for immediate structural audits of historical transit facilities across the country. For Julian Vance, who had spent 20 long years carrying the crushing weight of his sister's missing status, the arrival of the final grand jury presentation brought a profound wave of emotional vertigo that transcended the clinical parameters of a legal victory. He stood as a silent, unyielding anchor on the courthouse steps every single morning, his face a mask of absolute physical exhaustion but complete, unshakable peace as he watched the task force prepare to enter the final phase of judicial closure. The journey that had begun with a sudden, shocking deathbed confession in a local hospital room was drawing down to its definitive, historical conclusion, proving to a watching world that while a killer can use concrete, steel, and time to build an empire of secrets beneath the stone, the truth possesses an elemental, crushing force that will eventually shatter the foundation and demand absolute accountability in the light of day. The sweltering heat of July 2026 did nothing to slow the relentless momentum inside Grand Jury Room 4 of the Dallas Federal Courthouse. The proceeding had entered its most critical and technically demanding phase, transitioning from the raw emotional gravity of the physical recoveries into a complex, dawn-dap analysis of corporate negligence and institutional blind spots. The multi-agency task force operating under Operation Deathbed Reckoning was no longer merely documenting the crimes of a dead man. They were systematically exposing how the rapid, unregulated expansion of Texas's industrial infrastructure in the late 20th century had created a perfect ecosystem for a mobile predator to thrive with absolute impunity. The morning session initiated with a high-stakes presentation of subsurface forensic architecture logs compiled by the state's engineering task force. Behind the prosecutor, the massive digital projection screen flashed a series of high-contrast, three-dimensional radar scans that sliced through the foundations of the 6 distinct recovery sites across Texas. The visuals were chillingly uniform, whether it was the multi-story parking garage in Deep Ellum from 2005, the Austin Document Storage Facility from 1999, the Corpus Christi Grain Silo from 1992, or the Lufkin Pumping Station from 1987, Marcus Montgomery had utilized an identical, highly disciplined system of structural integration. He had built his crimes directly into the load-bearing negative spaces of major industrial pores, calculating with absolute precision that the sheer weight of thousands of tons of commercial-grade concrete would permanently seal his secrets away from traditional law enforcement techniques. A senior structural forensic engineer took the witness stand, his voice carrying a flat, clinical authority that pinned the grand jury panel to their seats. He detailed how Montgomery, leveraging his official status as a regional logistics and construction coordinator, had systematically altered the concrete pouring schedules on active job sites to coincide perfectly with the hours immediately following his abductions. Marcus Montgomery didn't just stumble into these locations, the engineer stated, pointing a laser marker at a digitized blueprint of the West Dallas Foundation Trench. He possessed advanced corporate knowledge of upcoming municipal inspections, curing times, and structural density requirements. He deliberately placed his victims beneath critical infrastructure components, boiler rooms, retaining walls, support pillars, knowing that any future localized excavation would threaten the structural integrity of the entire multi-million-dollar facility, effectively forcing the state into a position of permanent logistical paralysis. As the technical data accumulated, the prosecution team rolled out a heavily guarded, climate-controlled evidence cart containing the primary physical anchor of the state's historical record, the original 39-year-old iron ammunition box pulled from behind the false wall of Montgomery's suburban workshop. The heavy container sat beneath the intense glare of the courtroom floodlights, its surface a scratched, oil-stained ledger of a 40-year campaign of terror. The specialized trace analysis team took the stand next, introducing a devastating array of multispectral laser imaging scans that mapped out the overlapping layers of friction ridges and skin cell residue embedded within the iron latch. The science was absolute and entirely unassailable. The data proved that Montgomery had actively opened, sorted, and handled the personal tokens of his victims hundreds of times during his retirement, using the hidden archive as a psychological engine to relive his moments of absolute control in the quiet hours of the night. The presentation grew increasingly intense as the prosecution introduced the comprehensive financial and corporate liability tracking data, mapping out how Montgomery's employers had inadvertently facilitated his cross-state hunting loops. By overlaying his historical corporate gas card charges, tollway transponder logs, and commercial vehicle maintenance manifests with the exact dates of the 6 disappearances, the state established a pattern of predatory movement that was terrifying in its cold efficiency. Dressed in an official corporate uniform, operating a fully marked company delivery van, and carrying a professional clipboard, Montgomery had been entirely invisible to the primitive highway monitoring systems of the 80s and 90s. The uniform acted as a universal psychological camouflage, a societal shield that completely disarmed the natural survival instincts of his victims and allowed him to operate as a ghost along the primary transit corridors of Texas. Outside the heavy stone walls of the Dallas courthouse, the public paralyzation had reached a state of unprecedented national magnitude, with major news networks running continuous, live updates under the Don Dapp banner. The Concrete Archive, grand jury exposes the infrastructure predator. The viral true crime broadcasts and digital analytical streams had completely transformed the case from a localized legal proceeding into a profound cultural reckoning regarding corporate vetting procedures and the security of public transit facilities. The realization that a systematic killer had thrived within the corporate backbone of the state for 4 decades, transforming major public utilities into an invisible network of tombs, shattered the public's remaining illusions of safety, triggering massive demands for immediate statewide security overhauls of all active commercial construction zones. For Julian Vance, who sat silently in the front row of the gallery, his eyes fixed firmly on the iron ammunition box, the relentless Don Dapp delivery of forensic proof brought a profound wave of emotional exhaustion but complete, unshakable resolve. The journey that had initiated with a sudden, shocking deathbed confession in a sterile hospital room was drawing closer to its definitive, historical conclusion, proving to a watching world that while a killer can use concrete, steel, and time to build a fortress of secrecy beneath the stone, the modern weaponization of forensic genomics possesses an elemental, crushing force that will eventually crack the foundation and demand absolute accountability in the light of day. The grand jury panel sat in a state of frozen, collective concentration as the prosecution prepared to introduce the final series of cross-jurisdictional DNA matches, preparing to seal the historical record on the most organized serial predator in the history of the Lone Star State. The blistering heat of the midsummer sun beat down relentlessly on the exterior glass facade of the Dallas Federal Courthouse, but inside Grand Jury Room 4, the air was chilled to a cold, clinical freeze. The historic proceeding had reached its absolute zenith, moving past the structural engineering logs and corporate liability manifests into the ultimate, definitive phase of biological confrontation. The multi-agency task force operating under Operation Deathbed Reckoning was prepared to lay down the final, unassailable layer of mathematical certainty onto the grand jury record, utilizing the absolute evolution of modern forensic genomics to seal the historical narrative of Marcus Montgomery's 40-year campaign of terror. The morning session initiated with a high-stakes testimony of Dr. Elena Rostova, the chief geneticist who had spent months analyzing the microcellular data pulled from the final 3 trophies inside the iron ammunition box. Dr. Rostova walked to the witness podium with a slow, deliberate precision, her arms cradling a massive, crimson-labeled binder containing the multispectral DNA sequencing charts for Clara Moreno and Becky Evans. Behind her, the massive digital projection screen split into a Don Dapp, rapid-fire array of comparative genetic bar graphs, casting a pale blue light across the silent, focused faces of the grand jury panel. With a flat, commanding authority that brooked absolutely no alternative interpretation, Dr. Rostova walked the panel through the complex molecular calculations that had successfully matched the invisible skin cell residue on the interior hinges of Becky's pink plastic sunglasses with the reference samples provided by her aging mother in Lufkin. The visual data was an absolute masterclass in biological mapping. Every short tandem repeat, every single nucleotide polymorphism, and every chromosomal marker locked into a perfect, mirroring alignment on the screen. The data we are documenting for this record does not leave room for statistical anomalies, historical margins of error, or tricks of environmental transfer, Dr. Rostova declared, her voice echoing clearly through the suffocating stillness of the room. The biological signature trapped within the plastic degradation of these child-sized sunglasses belongs to Becky Evans with a mathematical probability of 1 in 7.8 billion. This is not a circumstantial association. It is an absolute molecular identification that time, decay, and thousands of tons of concrete could never alter. The prosecution team seized upon this peak of scientific certainty to introduce the final, most legally devastating component of the state's multi-jurisdictional archive, the direct touch DNA mapping of the interior walls of the iron ammunition box itself. A senior forensic trace analyst took the stand, displaying a series of high-resolution digital maps that utilized laser-induced fluorescence to isolate the microscopic friction ridges and sweat residue left behind by Montgomery's fingers over decades of isolation. The data proved with absolute, terrifying clarity that the box was not a passive container of forgotten items. Montgomery had systematically sorted, handled, and arranged the tokens of his victims hundreds of times throughout his retirement, using the hidden collection as a functional psychological engine to mentally re-execute his abductions in the quiet hours of the night. The absolute precision of the trace analysis completely locked the legal vice around Montgomery's historical legacy, destroying any remaining public illusions that he was a reformed senior citizen who had lived a blameless life for 30 years. The presentation exposed him instead as an active, highly disciplined predator who carried his secrets like a toxic ledger deep within the foundation of his home, seamlessly integrating his malicious desires into the ordinary routines of his suburban life. By overlaying the high-resolution palm prints found on the box's iron latch with his official corporate employment fingerprint cards from 1987, 1992, 1999, and 2005, the state established a permanent, unbroken chain of physical custody that connected the dead killer directly to every single recovery site across the state of Texas. Outside the heavy granite walls of the Dallas courthouse, the public paralyzation had reached an unprecedented national magnitude, with major news networks running continuous, live digital analytical streams under the Don Dapp banner. The genetic indictment, the infrastructure predator broken. The viral true crime broadcasts and investigative specials had completely transformed the case from a localized legal proceeding into a profound cultural reckoning regarding corporate security protocols and the historical oversight of public transit utilities. The realization that a systematic killer had navigated the corporate backbone of the state for 4 decades, transforming major municipal construction projects into an invisible network of tombs, shattered the public's remaining illusions of safety, triggering massive demands for immediate statewide overhauls of all active industrial zones. For Julian Vance, who sat silently in the front row of the gallery, his face a mask of absolute physical exhaustion but complete, unshakable peace, the relentless Don Dapp delivery of forensic proof brought a profound wave of emotional release that transcended the clinical parameters of a legal victory. The journey that had initiated with a sudden, shocking deathbed confession in a sterile hospital room was drawing down to its definitive, historical conclusion, proving to a watching world that while a killer can use concrete, steel, and time to build a fortress of secrecy beneath the stone, the modern weaponization of forensic science possesses an elemental, crushing force that will eventually crack the foundation and demand absolute accountability in the light of day. The grand jury panel sat in a state of frozen, collective concentration as the prosecution prepared to close the historical record on the most organized serial predator in the history of the Lone Star State, preparing to deliver a final, definitive measure of justice for the 6 young women whose voices had finally broken through the concrete to be heard in the light of day. The quiet inside Grand Jury Room 4 of the Dallas Federal Courthouse became absolute as the foreperson slowly rose to present the final, historic true bill of indictment into the permanent judicial record. It was late afternoon on a scorching July day in 2026, and the suffocating Texas humidity outside contrasted sharply with the icy, clinical stillness that had settled over the wood-paneled room. For 3 grueling weeks, a multi-agency task force operating under Operation Deathbed Reckoning had delivered a Don Dapp, relentless barrage of mathematical and geographical certainties that systematically dismantled a 40-year empire of secrets. Now, the moment of absolute accountability had arrived, drawing a definitive line beneath the most sophisticated and terrifying multi-state infrastructure investigation in the history of the Lone Star State. The foreperson, a retired structural architect who had listened to every hour of technical forensic data with focused intensity, held the official legal documents with a steady, unyielding hand. As the clerk of the court stepped forward to receive the grand jury's formal declarations, The rustle of the heavy paper sheets echoed through the silent chamber like a visceral exclamation point. One by one, the formal findings were read aloud into the record, the clerk's voice flat, clinical, and carrying the immense, unassailable weight of absolute scientific verification. The legal parameters of the document did not merely target the ghost of Marcus Montgomery. They established a permanent, historical archive of criminal truth that could never be altered by time, corporate liability, or the death of the perpetrator. On the master count of historical serial homicide, encompassing the abductions and structural concealments of Sabrina Vance, Marissa Estrada, Clara Moreno, Becky Evans, and 2 additional unidentified victims whose profiles remain secured within the state registry. How does this grand jury find? The clerk intoned, the words hanging like a heavy block of ice in the frozen air of the room. The foreperson looked directly across the room at the empty defense table where Montgomery's corporate lawyers sat in stunned silence, his voice echoing clearly through the studio-quality recording arrays. We find a true bill of indictment on all counts, establishing absolute probable cause and historical certainty based on the indisputable genomics and trace physical evidence. 6 times the confirmation of absolute guilt was read into the record, a mathematical cadence of judicial closure that systematically locked the final vault door on Montgomery's legacy. The empty iron ammunition box, which had sat hidden behind a false wall in a suburban garage workshop for 4 decades, had successfully acted as the ultimate instrument of his historical execution, its contents weaponized by modern science to strip away his grandfatherly camouflage and expose the apex predator lurking beneath. The data proved beyond a shadow of a single legal doubt that while a killer can use thousands of tons of commercial-grade concrete, marked company vehicles, and official uniforms to build an invisible network of tombs beneath the city, the modern evolution of forensic genomics possesses an elemental, crushing force that will eventually crack the foundation and demand an account in the light of day. As the final signature was officially stamped onto the grand jury record, solidifying a historic milestone that would permanently alter the training manuals of American law enforcement, Julian Vance slowly lowered his head into his hands, his shoulders shaking silently as 20 long years of crushing, generational grief finally collapsed under the weight of total validation. The long, agonizing search that had begun in the neon-lit grid of Deep Ellum in August 2005 had reached its definitive destination, pulling his sister Sabrina out of the structural shadows and bringing her name back to the family section where it belonged. The baseline of human life had won its war against the stone, proving that the voices of the dead possess a permanent resonance that can cut through decades of silence to claim their final, absolute measure of justice. Outside the heavy granite steps of the Dallas courthouse, the blistering summer sun began to slip beneath the glass skyline, casting long, golden beams of light over a massive sea of flashing television cameras, media vans, and hundreds of silent citizens who had gathered to witness the conclusion of the tribunal. The permanent encampment of legal analysts and investigative true crime broadcasters erupted into immediate, live national transmissions under the Dawn DAP banner. The posthumous indictment sealed, the infrastructure killer permanently broken. Julian Vance walked slowly out into the blinding light, flanked by the veteran cold case detectives who had refused to let Sabrina's file fade into a historical footnote, his face a portrait of profound emotional exhaustion but complete, unshakable peace. Dressed in a dark tailored suit that had shielded him through weeks of intense court exposure, he stepped before the massive bank of microphones, his voice clear, steady, and echoing across the packed city blocks as he declared that the long nightmare was officially over, the code of his sister finally salvaged from the dark, and the soil of Texas permanently cleansed of a monster's shadow. The echoes of the final grand jury decree did not merely mark the legal conclusion of a multi-jurisdictional investigation. They triggered a sweeping, permanent transformation of the physical and structural landscapes across the state of Texas. By late July 2026, the sweeping resolution of Operation Deathbed Reckoning had forced an unprecedented administrative and historical audit of every major commercial transportation and utility network constructed during the late 20th century. A newly formed state infrastructure task force, comprised of federal cold case investigators, civil structural engineers, and forensic analysts, was permanently mobilized to systematically re-examine historical logistics loops, material manifests, and concrete pouring schedules from 1979 to 2010. The goal was no longer the simple location of active evidence. It was the total, clinical purification of the state's built environment, ensuring that no further hidden vaults of calculated malice could remain buried beneath the public spaces of the Lone Star State. Across the sprawling metroplex of Dallas, the industrial zones of Austin, the maritime shipping channels of Corpus Christi, and the dense timberlines of Lufkin, the ground itself seemed to undergo a process of profound historical exhumation. At each of the 6 confirmed recovery sites, the heavy mechanical infrastructure that had once served as Marcus Montgomery's ultimate camouflage was systematically decommissioned, altered, or marked with solemn, permanent monuments dedicated to the young women whose names had been stolen from the living world. The West Dallas manufacturing facility where Sabrina Vance had been trapped beneath the concrete slab initiated a multi-million-dollar structural renovation, permanently sealing off the original excavation trench and converting the surrounding interior space into a quiet, sunlit memorial garden for the employees and visiting families. The physical geometry of the city was being actively rewritten, transforming sites of absolute horror into spaces of collective memory, historical validation, and unyielding vigilance. The technical and legal methodologies developed during the intense 3-week tribunal in Grand Jury Room 4 were rapidly digitized and codified into an advanced, national law enforcement protocol known officially as the Montgomery Genomics and Infrastructure Tracking Directive. This pioneering framework mandated that all active missing persons databases across the United States be dynamically integrated with historical commercial construction permits, corporate logistics cards, and regional concrete pouring registries from the pre-digital era. The realization that a systematic predator could leverage official uniforms, marked corporate vehicles, and professional structural knowledge to execute clean, trace-free abductions shattered the traditional paradigms of criminal profiling, forcing modern cold case squads to look past the transient drifter archetype and focus intensely on the mobile, institutional operators of society. The empty iron ammunition box, now resting securely within a climate-controlled vault at the Smithsonian's Forensic Archives, stood as a sobering master template for future generations of behavioral analysts, a physical monument to the terrifying power of compartmentalized sociopathy. For the surviving families who had spent decades navigating the suffocating dark of perpetual uncertainty, the post-indictment weeks brought a quiet, heavy transition from public advocates back into private individuals trying to reconstruct their personal lives around a definitive truth. Julian Vance spent his late summer evenings far away from the blinding camera flashes of the courthouse steps, returning to the quiet, tree-lined suburban streets where he and Sabrina had spent their childhood summers. The frantic online campaigns, the constant pressuring of the cold case squads, and the obsessive mapping of Deep Ellum's surveillance blind spots were replaced by a profound, heavy silence, a quiet space where memory could finally disconnect from trauma and attach itself to peace. He organized a private, intimate memorial service at a small chapel overlooking the Trinity River, bringing together the Estrada, Moreno, and Evans families to share a singular, sacred moment of quiet reflection that only those who had survived the concrete vaults could truly understand. The legacy of the 2005 Dallas cold case solved resonated through the halls of modern forensic science as an absolute, unassailable victory for the weaponization of human genomics against the passage of time. The single, discarded fast food cup pulled from a Seattle waste receptacle in early 2026 had acted as a biological key, unlocking a subterranean network of historical horror and proving that a human being's unique genetic code possesses an elemental, permanent weight that outlasts the human heart and the stone itself. As autumn began to settle over the plains of Texas, casting long, cool shadows across the concrete highways and towering industrial structures that define the modern landscape, the long, terrifying phantom of Marcus Montgomery was permanently erased from the public path. The soil of the state was finally cleansed of a shadow, the legal ledger was completely clear, and the 6 young women whose voices had been buried in the dark for a generation were finally, definitively resting in the light. The arrival of the winter chill in late 2026 brought a quiet, sweeping stillness over the state of Texas, casting a pale, crystalline light across the vast concrete highway corridors and towering industrial complexes that had once hidden the state's most profound criminal secrets. The frenzied media caravans that had choked the downtown blocks of Dallas for months had finally dispersed, leaving the granite steps of the federal courthouse empty and silent under the cold northern winds. The historic omnibus indictment, now officially bound in heavy leather volumes within the state's permanent legal archives, stood as an unassailable wall of forensic fact, a definitive monument to a multi-agency operation that had systematically dismantled a 40-year empire of architectural deception. Yet, as the public spotlight faded, the real, systemic work of Operation Deathbed Reckoning entered its most enduring, structural phase, permanently embedding the lessons of the infrastructure killer into the very fabric of American law enforcement and civil engineering. Across the United States, municipal planning boards, Department of Transportation offices, and industrial construction firms began implementing unprecedented, mandatory historical screening protocols that were directly inspired by the forensic failures exposed in Marcus Montgomery's double life. The realization that a highly organized serial predator had utilized his official corporate authority, marked utility vehicles, and professional access to concrete pouring schedules to build an invisible network of tombs forced a total, nationwide reckoning regarding the security of public works projects. New federal directives required that any structural modifications, demolitions, or deep earth excavations of civil infrastructure built between 1975 and 2010 be preceded by a dynamic cross-reference of historical employee logs, commercial shipping manifests, and regional missing persons archives. The built environment of the nation was no longer viewed as a static array of utility systems. It was treated as a living ledger of human history, a physical landscape that required absolute transparency to ensure that no further pockets of hidden malice could remain buried beneath the feet of the public. Inside the behavioral analysis units of the FBI, the legacy of the iron ammunition box completely revolutionized the training curricula for future generations of criminal profilers, forcing a total retirement of the primitive, disorganized transient theories that had dominated 20th century investigative models. Specialized seminars, titled The Logistics of Predatory Concealment, focused heavily on how Montgomery had weaponized the ordinary, mundane routines of corporate middle management to insulate himself from suspicion for 4 decades. Analysts systematically dissected the dual geometry of his existence, demonstrating how his active participation in neighborhood watch groups, youth sports volunteer networks, and suburban church committees acted as a highly effective psychological shield that completely blinded local authorities to his predatory travel patterns. The case study proved with absolute, mathematical certainty that the most dangerous monsters do not live in the margins of society. They operate within the very infrastructure that keeps communities connected, using the banality of official uniforms and commercial clipboards to completely disarm the natural survival instincts of their prey. For Julian Vance, the transition into the closing months of 2026 brought a profound, heavy quietness that he had not experienced since that warm, devastating Friday night in August 2005 when the music stopped in Deep Ellum. The frantic, obsessive digital loops of mapping camera blind spots, reviewing yellowed police notes, and conducting independent midnight interviews were permanently replaced by an empty desk and a mind finally granted the luxury of peace. He spent his days away from the city, volunteering his time to assist the families of newer missing persons cases, teaching them how to navigate the complex bureaucratic networks of modern law enforcement without letting their personal lives be entirely consumed by the gravity of the unknown. On a crisp, silent December morning, he drove out to the rural cemetery where Sabrina's remains had been laid to rest beside their mother, placing a small, glass container of fresh, sparkling water on the polished granite marker, a quiet, intimate nod to the final mundane detail of the night she vanished, now salvaged from the dark and restored to the light of control. The baseline of human life had won its multi-generational war against the concrete, proving to a watching world that time, depth, and thousands of tons of commercial-grade aggregate stone possess absolutely no shielding power when modern forensic science decides to weaponize the truth against a killer's ghost. The empty paper coffee cup from 1994 and the plastic fast food cup from 2026 remained locked within secure educational display cases at the State Forensic Academy, a silent, powerful testament to the unyielding, generational march of investigative genetic genealogy to rewrite the past and reclaim the stolen names of the dead. As the sun slowly set over the vast, shimmering horizon of the Lone Star State, painting the concrete overpasses and industrial shipping channels in deep hues of gold and amber, the long shadow of 2005 was officially, permanently dispelled from the land. The soil of Texas was clean, the legal books were sealed, the phantoms of the iron box had been brought home, and the 6 young women whose voices had broken through the stone were finally, definitively resting in the light. The transition of the state of Texas v. the estate of Marcus Montgomery from an active, high-velocity courtroom battlefield into a permanent cornerstone of American jurisprudence marked the true, quiet dawn of a new forensic era. By early 2027, the icy winds that swept across the concrete highways of Dallas no longer carried the heavy, suffocating weight of an unresolved nightmare. The multi-agency war rooms had been broken down, the dry erase boards crowded with historical logistics loops had been wiped clean, and the dozens of field investigators who had spent years chasing a shadow had returned to their respective jurisdictions. Yet, the systemic ripples of Operation Deathbed Reckoning continued to expand across the international law enforcement community, serving as a historic blueprint for how modern society must aggressively confront the deeply buried, architectural sins of its past. The global legal community recognized the posthumous omnibus presentation as a landmark masterclass in civil accountability and corporate liability transformation. Legal teams from multiple continents converged on the University of Texas School of Law to dissect the intricate civil frameworks that had successfully pierced the corporate insurance shields of the logistics firms Montgomery had operated throughout his career. The groundbreaking legal precedent established that corporations could be held structurally and financially liable for the historical, predatory actions of employees who weaponized corporate assets, such as marked delivery vans, official uniforms, and secure construction gate passes, to execute violent crimes. This dramatic shift in corporate accountability triggered a massive, multi-billion-dollar overhaul of employee vetting procedures within global supply chain networks, ensuring that high-mobility logistics personnel were subjected to continuous, rigorous biometric monitoring and historical deep background genetic tracking. Simultaneously, the physical cleanup of the Texas landscape entered its final, definitive phase under the strict, scientific oversight of the State Forensic Architecture Task Force. The industrial pumping station in Lufkin, where the fragile remains of 8-year-old Becky Evans had been rescued from the darkness of a 39-year-old concrete vault, was systematically dismantled by specialized crews. Rather than allowing the decaying masonry superstructure to remain an open wound in the heart of the community, the state completely cleared the wilderness site, turning the once-hidden graveyard into a sunlit public sanctuary forest. A simple, elegant limestone monument was erected at the center of the clearing, its polished surface deeply engraved with the names of all 6 victims, ensuring that future generations would walk beneath the towering pines with a profound sense of historical clarity, validation, and unyielding vigilance. The digital architecture of justice also evolved exponentially, with the integration of the Montgomery Tracking Directive into the central mainframe databases of Interpol and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Software engineers utilized the spatial data and behavioral algorithms derived from Montgomery's 40-year hunting loops to develop predictive analytical models that could flag active corporate logistics routes, matching historical missing persons anomalies across international borders. The old, flawed paradigm of viewing cold case files as static, isolated events was permanently replaced by an active, dynamic digital dragnet that treated every road, every bridge, and every piece of heavy civil infrastructure as a living matrix of human activity that could be decoded through the precise application of modern forensic data science. For Julian Vance, the arrival of this structural finality brought a deep, restorative peace that completely transcended the sharp, flashing lights of his years as a public media advocate. The desk in his home office, which had once been a chaotic, agonizing shrine of crime scene maps, unconfirmed highway toll receipts, and yellowed newspaper clippings of the 2005 Deep Ellum abduction, was now completely bare, illuminated only by the soft, warm light of the Texas afternoon. The intense, internal pressure to constantly police the blind spots of the city's surveillance networks had evaporated into a profound, heavy quiet, a peaceful space where he could finally remember his sister Sabrina not as a tragic headline or a forensic puzzle, but as the vibrant, brilliant young woman who laughed in the face of the hot summer sun. He channeled his enduring dedication into an independent foundation that provided immediate, compassionate mental health resources and specialized legal advocacy for the families of newly reported missing individuals, guiding them through the terrifying labyrinth of early-stage investigations with the steady, grounded wisdom of a man who had successfully walked through the deepest darkness and emerged into the light. The unyielding, generational march of modern genetic genealogy had officially won its historic war against the silencing power of concrete, steel, and time. The single, dusty paper coffee cup preserved from the 1994 South Boston crime scene and the modern fast food container retrieved from the Seattle surveillance operation remained perfectly secure within the central display archives of the National Museum of Health and Medicine, serving as an enduring, silent testament to the absolute triumph of human identity over the mechanics of criminal erasure. As the golden light of a late winter evening slowly settled over the expansive, modern skyline of Dallas, painting the concrete overpasses and bustling transit corridors in warm hues of amber and violet, the long, terrifying phantom of the infrastructure killer faded permanently into the history books. The soil of the Lone Star State was clean, the legal books were sealed, the phantoms of the iron box had been brought home, and the 6 young women whose voices had cracked through the stone were finally, definitively resting in the light.